It was the shot that shattered a movement, a single bullet that echoed far beyond the Utah campus where it was fired. In the chaotic hours and days that followed Charlie Kirk's death, the conservative movement appeared to unify in grief and outrage. But that unity was fragile, masking deeper fractures that Kirk himself had spent years holding together through sheer force of personality and political savvy. The story of what happened after the assassination is the one that reveals the true stakes, a story of how a tragedy designed to silence a voice instead exposed a bitter internal conflict. Section 1. The Catalyst. On September 10, 2025, Charlie Kirk was doing what he was known for, holding court on a college campus. Before a crowd of around 3,000 at an outdoor event at Utah Valley University, the 31-year-old conservative firebrand was in his element, seated under a tent emblazoned with "Prove Me Wrong." Then, at 12:23 p.m., a single bullet from a rifle, fired from the roof of the nearby Losi Center, approximately 140 yards away, struck him in the neck. He was pronounced dead at a local hospital shortly after. The manhunt was swift. The next day, 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson surrendered to authorities and was later charged with aggravated murder. A narrative that quickly took shape from investigators and Utah's governor was that Robinson was a lone gunman with leftist political motivations who had become increasingly concerned about LGBTQ rights. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. The reaction from the top was immediate and powerful. President Donald Trump, a close political ally of Kirk, released a video statement eulogizing Kirk as a patriot and a martyr for truth and freedom. Trump squarely blamed the political climate, stating that years of radical left rhetoric had led to this kind of violence. He later announced that Kirk would be posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, cementing his status as a martyr for the cause. On September 21st, nearly 100,000 people attended Kirk's memorial service at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, where Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance spoke. The movement had its martyr, its villain, and what seemed like its marching orders. But beneath the surface of this unified response, the foundation was already unstable. Section 2. The Fracture. In the immediate aftermath of a political assassination, a movement is supposed to unify, and for a time it did. The days following Kirk's death saw an unusual display of cohesion. Tributes poured in from across the conservative spectrum, memorials were organized, and the movement appeared to speak with one voice in condemning political violence. Erica Kirk, his widow, was unanimously elected CEO and chair of the board of Turning Point USA, a move Charlie had reportedly wanted in the event of his death. It seemed, at least on the surface, that the movement would rally around his legacy. But beneath this surface unity, tensions were already simmering. Charlie Kirk's greatest talent wasn't his debating skill. It was his knack for acting as the political glue for a deeply divided coalition. He brought together libertarians, Christian nationalists, establishment donors, and online populists under the massive tent of Turning Point USA. He was a staunch supporter of Israel, who also gave platforms to voices skeptical of foreign entanglements. He had personally transitioned from a standard-issue libertarian to a champion of Christian nationalism, and he brought his organization along with him, hosting adherents of doctrines like the Seven Mountains Mandate, while still maintaining support from more secular conservatives. Without Kirk to mediate, the questions he had skillfully deferred could no longer be avoided. What was the MAGA movement actually for? Was it a political project to restore constitutional principles or a spiritual crusade to build a Christian nation? Should support for Israel be unwavering, or did America first mean something more isolationist? Could the movement tolerate figures who trafficked in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, or did it need clear moral boundaries? These weren't new questions. Kirk had been managing these tensions for years. But his death removed the one person who could hold incompatible factions together through charisma, tactical ambiguity, and strategic bridge building. It was just a matter of time before the fault lines he had paved over would rupture into the open. That time came 3 months later in Phoenix. Section 3. The Analysis. History is filled with examples of what happens when a charismatic leader dies without a clear successor or settled doctrine. When Alexander the Great died, his generals tore his empire apart, each claiming to be the true heir. The battle brewing within MAGA wasn't just about who would succeed Charlie Kirk. It was a battle over what his movement was actually for, and whether the coalition he built could even survive without him. The most significant fault line that would emerge was foreign policy, specifically on the issue of Israel and the broader question of whether the movement should exclude anti-Semitic voices. One camp, often aligned with neoconservative donors and the more traditional wing of the GOP, views unconditional support for allies like Israel as a cornerstone of American strength and moral clarity. The other, the America First populists, increasingly views that same support as a betrayal of nationalist principles, arguing it puts foreign interests ahead of American ones. Some voices within this faction have gone further, embracing or tolerating conspiracy theories about Jewish influence, claims that establishment conservatives find abhorrent. Kirk had managed to appease both sides. He had what one observer called a bulletproof resume defending Israel, having said in August 2025, "I believe in the scriptural land rights given to Israel. I believe in fulfillment of prophecy." Yet he also gave platforms to voices critical of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and concerned about American entanglement in Middle Eastern conflicts. Without him to navigate this tightrope, the disagreement would become an irreconcilable conflict. The second critical fault line was theological. Over the years, Kirk had brought Turning Point USA increasingly into alignment with Christian nationalism. TPUSA hosted speakers advocating for Christian dominion over society's institutions. But many within the movement, especially those with more libertarian roots or secular orientations, were deeply uncomfortable with this theological turn. As long as Kirk was leading, his charisma and political success kept these tensions in check. But with him gone, the question became unavoidable. Was this a movement for limited government and free markets, or for building an explicitly Christian America? These weren't abstract debates. They would determine who got to speak at Turning Point events, what causes the organization would champion, and ultimately, who would control the most influential youth conservative organization in America as the party looked toward 2028 and beyond. Section 4. Ground Zero at AmerFest. 3 months after the assassination, inside the Phoenix Convention Center, the simmering tensions erupted into open warfare. Turning Point USA's annual AmerFest, meant to be a defiant tribute to its fallen founder, instead became ground zero for a battle over the movement's soul. Kirk's microphone, the one he had been holding when he was shot, was displayed on stage in a glass case under a spotlight. The tent from his American Comeback Tour was set up in the exhibition hall with a ring light so attendees could pose for photos. The merch table sold his Freedom t-shirt design in multiple colors for $35 each, but the reverent atmosphere couldn't contain the ideological war about to break out. From the main stage on the opening night, Ben Shapiro delivered a blistering address that shattered any pretense of unity. He sharply criticized Tucker Carlson for interviewing self-described white nationalist Nick Fuentes on his podcast, calling it an act of moral imbecility. He attacked Megyn Kelly and others for failing to condemn Candace Owens, who had spread anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, including baseless claims that Israeli spies were involved in Kirk's death and that Charlie had been betrayed by people close to him. Authorities had confirmed Robinson acted alone, but that didn't stop the conspiracy theories from spreading among Owens' 5.7 million YouTube subscribers. "These people are frauds and they are grifters," Shapiro thundered to the thousands gathered, "and they do not deserve your time." He called for a movement grounded in facts and principles, not conspiracism and hate. The response was instantaneous and brutal. Carlson took the stage barely an hour later, mocking Shapiro's stance, deplatforming and denouncing people at a Charlie Kirk event. "I'm like, what? It's hilarious," he told the audience. Carlson dismissed the idea of a Republican civil war as totally fake, suggesting it was ginned up by people. Carlson denied being anti-Semitic, then minimized the problem of anti-Semitism by claiming bias against white men was precisely as bad as anti-Semitism, but it is much more widespread. A day later, Steve Bannon escalated the conflict to new heights. In a speech that drew cheers from thousands, he accused Shapiro of being like a cancer and claimed he wanted to take over Turning Point USA while putting Israel's interests ahead of the United States. "This is a proxy on 28, Bannon declared, referring to the 2028 presidential race. He claimed that Kirk had opposed this concept of Greater Israel and Israel First, a characterization disputed by those who knew Kirk's consistent record of supporting Israel. The accusations flew in both directions. Shapiro condemned Kelly as guilty of cowardice for refusing to call out Owen's conspiracy theories. Vivek Ramaswamy, speaking to the crowd, insisted that anyone who normalizes hatred toward any ethnic or religious group does not have a place as a leader in the conservative movement. Carlson, for his part, also spoke against bigotry targeting Muslims, perhaps trying to position himself above the fray. The effect was electric. The thousands of young activists in attendance were no longer just attendees at a conference. They were witnesses to a movement tearing itself apart in real time. On their phones, they could watch the speeches and fiery rebuttals being shared across social media. Lines were drawn. Allegiances were tested. The unity that had been so carefully manufactured in the hours after Kirk's death had completely evaporated, replaced by open hostility. On the final day, Vice President J.D. Vance, who had flown on Air Force Two to collect Kirk's remains and helped carry his casket, delivered the closing speech. Erica Kirk introduced him, having publicly endorsed him for the 2028 presidential nomination. But rather than settling the disputes, Vance declined to set any red lines on bigotry or anti-Semitism. "I didn't bring a list of conservatives to denounce or to deplatform," he said. "We don't care if you're white or black, rich or poor, young or old, rural or urban, controversial or a little bit boring, or somewhere in between. It was a statement of big tent politics, an appeal to avoid purity tests." But to many, it was also an evasion, a refusal to define boundaries for what the movement would or wouldn't tolerate. AmerFest 2025 wasn't a tribute to Charlie Kirk. It was a preview of the brutal fight to come over who would define his legacy and inherit his political machinery. Conclusion. In the weeks since AmerFest, the movement has remained fractured. While Turning Point USA continues to draw interest fueled by Kirk's martyrdom, it's also an organization navigating treacherous internal politics. Erica Kirk, his widow and the new CEO, has been thrust into a leadership role overseeing a coalition threatening to splinter along the very fault lines her husband had worked to paper over. Some question whether she can unite a movement increasingly divided over Israel, anti-Semitism, and the role of Christian nationalism in conservative politics. President Trump remains the movement's undisputed figurehead, but at 79 and constitutionally barred from a third term, the party is already looking ahead. Tucker Carlson asked the question on many minds: who gets the machinery when the president exits the scene? The answer remains unclear. Vance has positioning and Erica Kirk's endorsement, but the path to 2028 will require navigating the ideological minefield on full display in Phoenix. The assassination of Charlie Kirk was intended to silence a powerful voice on the right. Instead, it has triggered an identity crisis that the movement may never fully resolve. The questions it raises are existential. Will the populist nationalists succeed in purging the establishment conservatives and neoconservatives they view as obstacles? Will figures like Ben Shapiro retake control and steer the movement back toward a more traditional conservatism with clear moral boundaries? Or will the movement fracture into competing tribes, some willing to tolerate anti-Semitic voices in the name of big tent politics, others insisting on principled exclusions? Charlie Kirk built something powerful, a youth movement that helped elect Donald Trump and shaped conservative politics for a generation. But movements built around charismatic leaders face a fundamental test when those leaders die. Can the vision survive without the visionary? Can the coalition hold without the coalition builder? As the conservative movement heads toward 2028 and beyond, those questions hang in the air, unanswered, urgent, and increasingly divisive. What do you think will happen in the power vacuum left behind? Who will ultimately win the war for the soul of MAGA? Let me know your theory in the comments below. I'm Machine Pun Kelly, and thanks for watching. If you want more in-depth discussion of contemporary issues, don't forget to click like and subscribe.